So Vox posted this a few days ago. I replied to it at the time, but there were still a few things I wanted to say about it, so I thought I'd make this video. He's responding to J.B. Bury's History of the Freedom of Thought. A man can never be hindered from thinking whatever he chooses, so long as he conceals what he thinks. The working of his mind is limited only by the bounds of his experience and the power of his imagination. But this natural liberty of private thinking is of little value. It is unsatisfactory and even painful to the thinker himself if he is not permitted to communicate his thoughts to others, and it is obviously of no value to his neighbours. Moreover, it is extremely difficult to hide thoughts that have any power over the mind. If a man's thinking leads him to call in question ideas and customs which regulate the behaviour of those about him, to reject beliefs which they hold, to see better ways of life than those they follow, it is almost impossible for him, if he is convinced of the truth of his own reasoning, not to betray by silence, chance words, or general attitude that he is different from them and does not share their opinions. Some have preferred, like Socrates, some would prefer today, to face death rather than conceal their thoughts. Thus, freedom of thought, in any valuable sense, includes freedom of speech. Now, he's condensed this passage into a syllogism, which is here. The first point is, man's thoughts are free because they cannot be known or hindered by other parties. The second, man cannot refrain from speaking his thoughts. And the conclusion, therefore, freedom of speech is an intrinsic right of man. He says he trusts that the reader will be able to see the two obvious major flaws. I didn't, to be honest, but here they are. If man's thoughts are free because they cannot be known or hindered, then man's speech cannot be for that same reason. So I think everyone pretty much agrees on this, although the science is catching up with this point a bit, I think, and there will be a time in the future when people will be able to see what other people are thinking. Then this will no longer be true. It won't be true that they cannot be known, but this will still be true. Can never be hindered from thinking whatever he chooses, so long as he conceals what he thinks, tinfoil hats or whatever. So I would update that. This follows on to say, if we agree with this, then man's speech cannot be for that same reason. So I don't think Vox is saying that man's speech cannot be free for this same reason. He's not saying that this reason proves that man's speech cannot be free, but he's saying that the reason that man's thoughts are free cannot demonstrate that man's speech is free, because man's thoughts cannot be known or hindered, and man's speech can be known and can be hindered. Therefore, man's speech isn't free, which is true but trivial, I would say. J.B. Bury isn't saying that speech is free because no one can hear what you're saying. He's saying freedom of thought in any valuable sense includes freedom of speech. It should do. Not that it inherently does, which I think he would need to be saying for this to be a takedown. Second, we have evidence every single day that man is capable of concealing his thoughts, or at the very least, not converting them to speech. So obviously, the obvious point here would be that if we have evidence, he's probably not concealing it very well. Or at the very least not converting them to speech. So things like silence or general attitude. So there is a bit of a problem here. Man cannot refrain from speaking his thoughts. It is unsatisfactory or even painful if he is not permitted to communicate his thoughts. So unsatisfactory versus cannot. Difficult to hide thoughts versus cannot refrain from speaking his thoughts. There's a bit of a hardening of the rhetoric, which then comes in here to say that actually this isn't true. this isn't true, that this isn't what this is saying. Then third, and I don't think this is one of the two major flaws, the conclusion simply does not follow logically from the premises. So this comes a bit out of nowhere. I think we can ignore this, because if this wasn't true, this could still flow logically from it. That's how syllogisms work. So he must be saying the conclusion simply does not follow logically from the premises because of this, because the fact that man's thoughts are free because man's thoughts are free because they cannot be known or hindered, but man's speech can be known or hindered, therefore it isn't free. Yeah, fair enough, I suppose, but that's not what this is saying. It's saying it's unsatisfactory and even painful. Is that not true?